Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the February 19th Policy Committee meeting. As far as introductions go, we'll welcome back Rachel Marciano, our student representative, Andrea McMenamin, our teacher representative, Julia, Lydia, Mr. Batchelor, Dr. Stevenson, and our solicitor, who's I'm going to introduce as a new father as well. So congratulations on the birth of Tyler.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I'm a little tired. You look good.
So welcome, everybody, and I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Stevenson for some administrative remarks.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. The agenda as outlined is what we will follow, and so because of time, a late start, we'll just go right into our follow agenda. Thank you.
Okay, terrific. And since there is virtually no one in the public, I guess it's safe to say that we will not be having a public comment tonight.
We didn't either.
We don't have anybody sitting out there. So we'll move right on then to the approval of minutes. Committee, how do you, did you get a chance to look over the minutes? And
I am not qualified to make any comment. How about you?
All good.
All good?
You guys aren't mine.
Rachel, Andrea, all good with the minutes?
Actually.
Okay.
Mr. Batchelor, this is unrelated, but I've been looking at the weather forecast, and we're supposed to get a lot of snow tomorrow, and everything says it. So what do you think about that?
Rachel, I was looking at the two models. I was waiting to hear about the last two models. Are the last two models?
Oh, the last two models look awful, Mr. Batchelor. What are we going to do?
Same amount of snow?
Same amount, 9 a.m.
You think we should cancel school tonight for
I
tomorrow?
think we have to. It's only safe.
As the student rep, you want to take that responsibility to make this call tonight?
I will take all the blame if any student is upset about the call.
All right. Wait, was it the students I was worried about?
Is this a setup?
No, Rachel is letting me know. I think, Rachel, your suggestion is a great idea. For anyone tuning into policy, we are really going to heighten the viewership of policy meetings.
They're going to know first.
The two people who are tuning in right now, all Radnor schools, based on Rachel's recommendation, will be closed tomorrow. I'm going to step out of the meeting right now and actually set up the call to do that.
Now,
Thank you, Rachel.
if you're watching this meeting on a Friday or a Thursday later on in this week, that does not apply to you.
Yeah, that is a good point. This is for Wednesday, February 20th. That is a really good point. Thank you, Mrs. Solomon.
And it might not increase our viewership, but I do think you might get a little razzing, Rachel, from all the student reps who preceded you this evening, who asked the question as they were leaving tonight, is school going to be canceled tomorrow? And you were the lucky student who got the breaking news. Yeah, that's right. That's right. So enjoy. All right, terrific. Well, there you go. It's all downhill from here, because that's probably the most exciting thing we have to talk about tonight. Okay, so we'll go into agenda item number 1, which is Policy 239, Foreign Exchange Students.
So 239, as you can see, as this policy was revised to clarify that foreign exchange students who are admitted to the district schools to be evaluated to determine if they should be identified as English learners and provide instruction pursuant of the district's language instruction and educational program. The purpose of this was the revisions were made to the eligibility criteria that foreign students be eligible to enroll in the district. What I will do is I will ask our solicitor to give specific feedback about this, since he was the author of the designing that.
Sure. All right, so some of the changes that were made to the policy were made for different reasons. So I'll start with the revisions regarding students being eligible when they have an F1 visa. I recommended removing those provisions given that it doesn't appear that Radnor accepts students that are on an F1 visa. In order to accept students with F1 visas, the district would have to be registered with the federal government to be able to issue the form I-20. And most public schools don't do that. I did a search online, and Radnor was not on the list. So I revised the policy to reflect that. The changes regarding English language services relates to the fact that under the new guidelines of the ESSA, school districts are now required to screen exchange students for eligibility for English language services. That was not always the case previously, so we added a note into the, I believe we put it into the administrative regulation, that students need to be screened for eligibility for English language services. And finally, we moved the majority of the guidelines into the administrative regulation. The one open item in this policy for the committee to perhaps discuss, we left blank currently the number of students that the district would like to admit as a matter of policy on an annual basis into district schools. The one thing to keep in mind is that given that students coming from abroad now will potentially qualify for English language services, one thing to think about is how many of those English language classes do you have? Do they operate at all of the district schools? Is there one class district-wide? Perhaps Dr. Stevenson can weigh in on that a little bit more, or Mr. Batchelor when he returns. But that's one aspect to consider when determining how many you want to admit. The policy can always say that additional students can be admitted with prior board approval in addition to whatever you put into policy.
So I don't really know how many, on average, exchange students we have in the high school each year. Do you know?
We don't have average any, I spoke to Mr. Bechtel, so it's not a program that we tend to have.
Oh, really? Because we used to have.
No, that was, someone had asked about that earlier. We have the students from England who come every other year.
Yeah, no, not that, though. I thought we used to have, there was a student from Germany that came, this might be 10 years ago, I don't know.
Most of the times when students come from another country, they are sponsored in the sense that they become, the person that they live with becomes their local parente, or they multi-occupancy with them. So they take on that guardianship for that particular year.
Right, they have a host family, but so.
But that person, that parent tends to be, that they live with,
Yeah.
becomes the gratis in relationship to assume those, whereas in foreign exchange students, those students were there for the purpose of under the policy, whereas in most of the kids, and we don't have a lot that have that person becomes that guardianship.
All right, wait, so if a student comes over and stays with a family, you're saying this policy does not apply to them?
No, I'm not
No.
saying that. We
Oh.
were asking about what the numbers are.
Yeah.
And you said that, I'm saying that the only, in the last few years for the high school, if there was any case in that those were not falling in this policy, it was only when someone took on the guardianship of that particular student versus falling under this policy for foreign exchange. They were not classified as the foreign exchange.
Okay,
That's
so
what I'm saying.
we really didn't have
Yes.
this issue.
Exactly.
All right, and so before, did we have ARs for this, or you've kind of just broken it out now into that format?
This AR is a new AR.
Okay, so I really like this. I like the policy being, this is exactly how it should be, in my opinion. I like this, that we have a succinct policy, and then you put everything in the AR.
That's
so-
been what the
yeah.
policy committee has transitioned to over the past few years, so. Do you have any
Excellent.
more questions on 239, Lydia? 'Cause
Well,
I'd
I
like to give-
assume you're going to answer the ELL availability. I don't know that either. Well, we haven't had any exchange students, so I don't know that it's really a problem, but.
Well, they are, ELL is offered in all our schools.
Okay.
And so that all of our schools have the ability to provide those services. What would need to be, when we talk about specific numbers, we would have to, as administration, make specific recommendations for that based on if there was a need to present a specific number, that would be based on our ability to provide that support without incurring additional burden on our current academic support that we provide.
Okay. Julia, do you have questions on the policy?
Thank you. forgive me if my questions are answered somewhere else in the guidelines, or there are a lot of papers here, there are a lot of things going on. So my first question, where the policy says that I guess you will have, the administration will decide by July 1st about attendance. That's the cutoff date. Tell me about that date, why that date, if that works in terms of, you know, are you adequately staffed already by July 1st to know who you can accommodate and who you can't, scheduling, et cetera?
So the, most of the staffing, like the high school does their scheduling earliest because the students do their own recommendation teachers, and the middle school fall in elementary. July 1st gives opportunity to make an assessment, if necessary, to make adjustments, and if there's a need for additional hiring. However, like for the instance of, for the purpose of recommendations, and this would be something that would be recommended to the superintendent, would be to ensure that before accepting a student based on numbers, that July would give us an opportunity to say, here's what our numbers are, because a lot of times we have numbers already in place. However, with ELL, English language program, we also have kids who still come after July, and a lot of them don't register in September. So it would be a question mark for us. But so by having that July cutoff, we would know how many students that we would accept if that would be the case. Again, I would say that we haven't had that this experience in the last few years, so it's something that we would have to visit if it becomes an issue.
And when we talk about exchange students, I just want to clarify, we're not talking about refugees, we're not talking about children who move here or even have always lived here and need special services with English language. We're just talking about an exchange program.
Yes.
Okay. So looking at in the policy manual, there are guidelines. One is number 5, students will be considered for admission on space of available basis. So that's what you're talking about. That's the question mark that we're leaving open. Okay. I'm looking at 8. Exchange students are expected to understand, ask, answer questions, and speak English to the extent required in the classroom setting. How do you marry that with the ESL needs?
That's a great question. And the requirement that students are expected to ask, understand, answer questions in English is more of a subjective standard, just to put potential applicants on notice that when you come here as an exchange student, one of the things that we would hope is that you're able to participate in school programs with other high school students, and that you can experience a real-world high school experience. If you come here and you don't have any ability to communicate at all, you're not going to get the most out of that experience, because you would qualify for English language services, but you would very likely be in specialized classes your whole day. You wouldn't necessarily be participating with the rest of the student body. So all students have to be evaluated to determine whether they qualify for EL services. But someone that speaks the language and can get by in the classroom may very well still qualify for EL services. But this requirement in the AR is more of a subjective standard, just to indicate that when students come here, they should have some foundational understanding of the language so that they can participate meaningfully.
And what would happen if someone showed up and they couldn't participate meaningfully?
Well, usually, that rarely happens, because the students that come through the programs come through programs that would be approved through the board. So they're...
And also because we don't have any.
Right.
We've never been in that situation because we don't have any.
Right. But in order for a student to qualify under the policy, they would have to come through one of these organizations that I guess at some point in the future the board could accept as a recognized program through which foreign exchange students can come. generally they're companies that this is what they do. Do they miss the mark sometimes? I guess there's always that case. But that's specifically why the policy says that they have to come through a reputable organization, one that's been vetted by administration, recommended to the board, and accepted by the board as an organization that we trust.
So that's the insurance policy.
Correct.
Okay. In the second last paragraph, it talks about programs with single schools in France, Germany, Japan, and Spain, and I'm assuming there's a reason for those schools to be listed there.
So that language actually was in the prior board policy, and I simply moved that over. So that would be, perhaps, Dr. Stevenson, a question for you or Mr. Bechtold. I don't know whether that should be retained or not, and we may not need to decide that today because this is just the AR, but that language was carried forward from the prior board policy.
Yeah, and I think that's because those were the countries where students did come from, but, yeah.
And that's the same would be true for that next paragraph about students that participate in a one-for-one private exchange. That language was also carried forward from the prior board policy.
Which one?
These two.
Yep, go ahead.
So you're recommending to strike those out?
If in fact the district no longer supports those items, then we can.
I don't think we do, but I would feel more comfortable consulting with Mr. Bechtel and then getting back to the board on it.
Okay.
And just one last question. Can you tell me, when you were talking about we're going to work with sort of like a vetted, approved program, can you tell me where that is? Because I missed that. I'm sorry. Enrollment.
The second paragraph under authority, the board permits the enrollment of exchange students who reside within the district as participants in a group-sponsored exchange program or in group-sponsored exchange programs approved by the board.
Okay, so we have to approve it first. And under what policy procedure do we do that?
I would assume that if the district was looking to expand its foreign exchange program, a company could be sought out. There's a company out there, it's ABC. I'm not exactly sure what the acronym stands for, but ABC is one that I see frequently. Or if an organization came forward and was looking, sometimes what happens is an outside organization is looking for a school to host students from abroad, and administration would evaluate that request, and if it was recommended to move in that direction, it would be placed before the board for approval.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Okay, any other questions from our student or teacher rep on this policy? No? Okay. The intention of this policy, not the AR, because we don't approve the ARs, but the policy to go for a first read next week at the business meeting. My question was, does that number in the authority section need to be filled in before it can move forward for a first read? And what's the process for ascertaining what number the district would like to, or the board would like to limit the number of students to?
I would say that would be a substantive component of the policy. My experience working with, half a dozen to a dozen other districts that have recently looked at this policy since the new EL guidelines went into effect, most school districts have put that number somewhere between 3 and 5. 3 would probably be the most common number, if I had to guess.
Okay, so since the number's not here, is that something that is reasonable for Dr. Stevenson to secure with Mr. Batchelor before it goes for a first read next week? Or is that something that the committee would need to know in order for it to be eligible for the first read?
I think if the committee's goal is to definitely get this to a first read, my recommendation would be to tentatively put a number in there. In the meantime, Dr. Stevenson can consult with Mr. Batchelor, and if for some reason Mr. Batchelor has a concern about that number, then it can either be pulled at the business meeting, or perhaps it can move forward for a first read, and then it would come back here next month for a repeat first read. If there's no concern, it can just proceed under
Just
the
put a
normal
number.
course.
So, all right, I guess I would propose putting in the higher of the numbers, 5, since it's currently not like we're being flooded with applicants for this.
I would actually say 3. And the reason why I said that is that because we don't have it, I would go with 3. and then, first of all, consult with Mr. Batchelor to make, as superintendent, to make the final decision. And then based on that recommendation, because we can, the thing we can always make, the board can always come back and make those adjustments. But I know that not only our district, but other districts, because we don't participate in a lot of these programs, and we haven't done it, and the primary reason that we are making these changes are related to the language, not the program. We're not trying to bolster the program or try to encourage influx of foreign exchange program. We're more making sure that our policy is aligned with the language. Therefore, I would side on the number of 3, because it's not. If we were in the business or we were actively participating in foreign exchange programs or having partnerships with the companies that our solicitor talked about, then yeah, then I would go with the higher number. But because the sole purpose of this was about the language and not about I would recommend 3,
Okay.
and then consult that if it so pleases the committee.
That was what I was going to say, is I would leave
Okay.
it up to our solicitor and administrator to project the number for us. Are you comfortable with that, Julia, and everybody else?
I'm interested in hearing what the number and how they arrive at it specifically, and what it will cost us, and the impact specifically of taking away ELL services from a Radnor student to give to someone else, in addition to, the estimated, tuition equivalents. So yeah, I'd love to see that. Thank you.
And just to note, the foreign exchange students who would
Excuse me.
come through these programs, they would not pay tuition, so it would be an extra student.
Yes.
On the district's rolls for that year.
Yeah.
So let me just be clear. Are we in agreement to put in the number 3?
That's not what I said, but I wanted to hear the number and the explanation why before I was comfortable with the number.
Mr. Batchelor would have the final say. My recommendation is the being consistent with what best practice of the districts that the solicitor has described use, and that's 3, with understand that we can make adjustments. That concurs with your concerns or questions about, to make sure that it is, number one, again, our goal here is not to encourage these programs, but the priority still has to be that our existing students who are providing services are making sure that their services are provided, and that even if we did have one, that it would not cause us to have a financial increase in relationship to oversight costs. So I recommended 3 based on best practices, and with holding that as a placeholder until consult with the superintendent, I will consult back to the policy if he changes his mind and says it should be another number, and share it with the policy committee before next week. That doesn't answer your question.
No,
I know.
but thank you for trying.
That's right.
Okay, well, I mean, we have to make a determination
The
here.
other thing that could be done is, if the committee does want to move forward with a placeholder number in there, we can also, the committee could ask Dr. Stevenson to solicit that feedback before the board would have to vote at the meeting next week, and provide that information to the committee. You wouldn't be able to deliberate the information back and forth by email, but Dr. Stevenson or Mr. Batchelor could either confirm the recommendation, whatever number you choose, or suggest a different course of action prior to the vote. That's just one other alternative.
Well, and also, since it's first read, we could discuss it at the board meeting if you want to do that.
Right.
Or you could present it, Dr. Stevenson could present it at the board meeting.
There's
to
any
us.
number of different ways that you can do it. We can bring it back to policy next month. You can move it forward with a placeholder number and ask for more feedback. You can move it forward in its current form and solicit input from the full board at next week's meeting, and then refer it back to policy. It would come for a repeat first reading next month. But there's any number of ways that you can do it. But at this point, it hasn't even gone for a first reading, so it's at least 2 months before it would be in final form.
So we have time.
Wait, hold on. I'm going to leave this to Dr. Stevenson to decide, because if it's information he has to gather, I'm kind of interested to know what you think would be, you would be most comfortable with. We have a lot of options that
Well,
it sounds like are laid out.
I mean, I'm comfortable moving it forward for the first read. However, I want to make sure that Ms. Bolenberger's questions, the analysis about cost analysis is also covered. So the question would be, if you're comfortable with it going to first read, with knowing that between first and second read, that we would give the cost analysis breakdown. I wouldn't be able to do all that necessarily by next week, so therefore I don't want to say that that would be something that we would have for you. If we do with 3 and have it first read with the understanding, by the time we would bring it back for the March meeting with a breakdown with that, and then before it goes to the board for the second read, those things are covered.
Before I answer that, is there a time sensitivity that I'm not appreciating, that we have to get this done?
This policy itself, there's no urgent deadline, compliance deadline or anything like that to get this adopted at the moment, no.
Then not to muddy it, I'd rather do it the right way if there's no urgency. I'd appreciate it if there was a law and we had to get something in place, but if we don't, I don't understand why we're rushing it.
So you're okay with the first read with the understanding we're going to bring it back, or you want?
Can you do it first read without a number?
Well,
We can do whatever we want.
You could move the policy forward to a first reading with no number, seek full board input. It would come back here, but then it would have to go for
Repeat
for a
first read.
repeat first read.
See, the thing is, just in the other timing factor is the other policy work that's in the pipeline. If Mr. Stevenson, Dr. Stevenson comes back to you with an explanation that makes you more comfortable with 3, then we don't have to expend an extra month on the policy. So would you be willing to take a leap of faith on the 3, knowing that you definitely have a chance to
Yeah, no, I
revisit it?
can't. Just for the reasons I said, nothing's changed.
I think one of the things that the question that has come up most frequently regarding this policy in other school districts, as Mrs. Bonenberger has mentioned, is what is the current size of the EL classes at the high school? And, look back 3 years and what was the trend for those 3 years? That's a common question that board members have asked elsewhere, and I think that information should be fairly easy to identify.
Let me ask you this question. Let's say that the resources for this are stretched as it is. Then what do you do with the policy? Do you say 0 students, or do you rescind the policy, or what do you do?
You could put language in the policy. You could do it a few different ways. You could either lower the limit from 3 down to 2 or to 1, or the policy could simply state that all students, anytime a student wants to apply for admission, they'd have to get board approval. Now, what you'd probably want to do then is move this deadline of July 1st up, because if sometimes school boards don't meet in July,
Right.
they may not be meeting until the middle of August.
Right.
An organization doesn't want to wait until the middle of August to know whether they'll be approved by a school board to come a couple weeks later. So in that case, you may want to consider moving that date up a little bit. But the policy could be changed to say that anytime a student wants to enroll, that has to be put before the board to approve.
So,
Interesting.
Well, I think we're a little bit all over the place here, because I'm comfortable saying 5, and that I think, would be able to handle that. And it doesn't seem like we have, like we're flooded with these. Amy, sounds like you're with 3, and that obviously is your recommendation, and I'm totally fine with 3. And Julia, it sounds like you want to know cost numbers.
I do. I'll also
Of
say,
ELL.
at still having children in the district, I'm aware at some extremely bloated grades even coming up that we're not addressing. So is that another thing we should be thinking about? Is it appropriate to have 2 in one grade, 0 in another? To blanketly say, okay, 5, 3, average 4. No, I can't do that. Can't do that. In fact, I would try to move up the date Probably, so that we could budget for it for the following year. I mean, if this was your house, that's what you do. You'd want to know in advance. And this is our house.
So going, in terms of next week, we are going to leave we have two options because we're not going to put a number in there, it sounds like. Do we want to leave it blank and debate as a board, or bring it back the following month with a number and rationale for the number, just to start the process over again?
I think we should put it, my opinion, forth to the board without a number in it, get the information from Dr. Stevenson and bring it back to committee next month, and then put our heads together then. I think that's more expedient than having 9 people, sort of weighing in on, I think that negates the purpose of the committee. I think we should hash it out here next month.
Well, then we wouldn't bring it forward to the board next week.
We would without a number.
Does that make sense, as opposed to just
It's going to
looking at
have
it
to
next
come
week?
back for a
Yeah,
repeat
exactly,
first
so why
read
should it go on?
anyway.
Well, it
The
keeps it
only
on
reason
track.
for bringing it forward to a
Keeps it on
first
track.
read would be so that you could introduce the policy to the board and let them know that it's going for a first read. It will be back for another first read, point out the issue that the committee is still looking at, and
Gotcha.
perhaps solicit feedback. That would be
Okay.
the only benefit to moving it forward to a first read.
Okay.
Wait, if we move this forward without a number, you're saying it, as a first read, it won't be second read the next time? It has to
No.
go back as a
No,
first
because
read
it's
if
a
we put a number in?
substantive change.
Correct.
Gotcha, okay.
So that has to come
That
back.
would be considered, okay.
Yeah, Ed just said it was a substantive change. So we'll go forward for a first read, that's what you're recommending, go forward for a first read to at least introduce the idea that this is a policy the committee is talking about, point out the unresolved issue in it, and say that it's essentially not being approved for a first read. Because, would it be? I mean, that's not really a first read.
You would be approving it for a first read, recognizing that it definitely has to come back.
Has more answers, that we need answers.
It's not completed, and that's sometimes the purpose of a first read. You know that it's not in completely final format, but we know ahead of time that we will be making substantive changes, because regardless of what number gets placed in there, that in and of itself is a substantive change. And in
Okay.
terms, and I have no recommendation in terms of what the committee does. The committee can retain it here in committee. You can move it forward for a first read with or without a number there. That's for the 3 committee members to decide in terms of where it goes. What I am definitely saying is that by having no number in there and then later placing a number in there, or putting a number in there and later changing it, that would be a substantive change. The only way that it could potentially go forward to 2 successive, a first read next week and a second read the following month, would be if a number was placed in there temporarily as a placeholder, and if that number didn't change in between first reading and second reading.
Right, okay.
Well, what do you want to do?
What do you guys want to do? I mean, it sounds like the benefits of bringing it forward next week, or at least that the full board gets a heads up and a chance to think about the issue that we have in the policy, knowing that it's going to come back to them 2 more times. Or we could wait until next month, have the proposed number with the backup information, put it in and send it for 2 reads to the full board after that.
Sounds like the right way to do things. Why rush it? And I like Chuck's input, too. He's so interesting with his insight and his perspective from being here so long. So, and I also say, Lydia, you always do bring up this point of that's what the committee's job is. And you're right. It's what our job is to do, is to hash things out here.
Okay, so you know what? I'm going to say, why don't we hold off putting this forward next week? It sounds like it. Let's get our ducks in a row and bring it back next month.
Okay.
And we'll go from there with numbers and our rationale, and hopefully from there, it'll go through for two reads. All right. Moving on then. Is that good for everybody? Moving on then, we will move on to policy 222 and its companion policies and the other sections of the manual. Dr. Stevenson, do you want to walk us through?
Thank you. So for 222, there are, for the purpose of the policy, was to ensure that we've had consistent language, particularly in including the language of electronic smoking products. Since this policy was originally adopted in 2008, schools like the rest of society has experienced on the electronic smoking products as a part of the whole tobacco and nicotine use. So therefore, 222 is to reflect it by making sure that our language is includes those terms. In addition, that what we wanted to do is to look at our discipline piece on there. If you look on page 2, we removed the guidelines because the guidelines were pretty much the same language that was in the AR. And what we did with the AR was change the language, particularly about in relationship to number 3, whereas that before tobacco products, which was smoking cigarettes, that was associated with a fine that was referred to the magistrate. For that is no longer part of the AR. However, in consulting with the school administration, that is something that they wanted to be a fine that they wanted to include as a school-issued fine, and that's why that language has been changed. So I'll answer any questions related to this policy before we move on to the accompanying policies.
Julia?
I have 2 questions. One, where do we stand on nicotine gum?
So, and that, I was going to mention that, since this policy was drafted about a couple weeks back, I have had a chance to look at the model policy that PSBA has put out. And one thing, when we got to it in a moment with in the 300s, the 400s, and the 500s, the one thing that I did see in the model policy from PSBA that I did like was a note that nothing in the prohibitions in these policies prohibits the nicotine or, gum or drops or anything like that that's part of a smoking cessation program.
Is that considered medicine?
It likely would be, yes.
So that would fall under our medicine policy?
Correct. And for that reason, there was no reference to that in the student model policy. But it is something that the committee could consider for the HR policies and later down the line when we look at, I believe it's policy 904 or 906 that we'll be looking at in the future.
Okay, that sounds great. And I personally think it should be covered under medicine, and it's already covered, so that's a good thing.
Yep.
My other question, I don't think I saw this here, but visitors, is that covered anywhere here?
It's policy 904.
That would be in this policy 900 that we just haven't gotten to yet that
Okay.
will be coming shortly.
Yeah, we're finding out, I think especially the more we do work in tandem with PSBA and their policy department, is that policies frequently don't change in a vacuum.
Right.
You look at the actual policy that speaks to the issue, but then there are all these other policies that touch on it in the policy manual, and they need to be updated too, so that everything is, all the language and practices are consistent. So, yes, there are a couple other policies in addition to the ones that we have here that are exactly the same policy that will be part of the wrapping around this whole issue. So are you saying, Ed, then, for the excerpt from PSBA that you liked, that you wanted to insert that into this document, or no?
Not necessarily for the student policy, because that would then be contradictory to the medication policy. It may be something that the committee wants to consider for the HR level policies and for the visitors policy.
Okay, all right, great. So then let's just focus then on 222. Do you have any other questions about?
Just one other thing, I don't know if this has been covered somewhere else. I'm looking at page 2 of the policy manual at the top. It just said, it talks about the district's tobacco use policy. Do you see where it says that? It's that second line about the district's tobacco use policy. And you insert also the language, the tobacco and electronic smoking products policy?
Good catch, yes.
Yes.
And that's all.
Okay. Rachel?
Yes, I have a question.
Sure.
So I'm looking at the red line version, so in the guidelines, the very last paragraph, we seemingly took out a part that specified cost. I was just curious what the benefit of doing that was. Like, I don't know, if it seems like lack of specificity to me, but I'm sure there was a better reason.
It was moved to the AR. So if
Okay.
you look at the AR sheet, the guideline piece, even though the language changed, that was moved to the AR.
Okay, thank you.
We've been typically with policy moving keeping anything that's actually mandated by state law in the policy, state or federal law in the policy, and moving anything else that's sort of district-oriented in practice into the guidelines. So that way, into the AR, so that way the administrative regulation has more flexibility. The administrators can change it as their
Gotcha.
practices change, because law obviously is less transient than that. So we keep the law stuff in the policy, which requires much more rigor to change than the actual administrative regulations. Does that make sense?
Yes, but, okay, follow-up question. To that point, so it says $50 plus court costs, so court costs being law-related, is that something we should, that can just be an AR if that's not district mandated?
Now, if you look at the number 3 on the AR sheet, so the language has been changed to say a student possessing or using tobacco and or electronic smoking products in violation of this policy will be issued a school-based fine of $50. There's no more, we eliminate the court cost fees. It's, not eliminate, because it's not going to be referred to court. So therefore, it is a school-based issue versus a citation.
Okay,
So I guess the court recommending something to court was a district-based practice that has been eliminated, and so therefore,
there will be no more cost.
right.
Gotcha, okay, thank you.
It's not going to get to that level. If you're
Right.
caught doing this, you don't have to go to court. Right?
Thank you.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions, Rachel? No? Okay. Andrea? No? Lydia?
No, I'm totally fine.
Okay. So we can, changing that on the page 2 of the 222 policy is not substantive, so before it goes for a first read next week, that change can be made, right, Dr. Stevenson?
Yes.
And other than that, I think that would be, this policy 222 is ready for a first read next week, knowing that the administrative regulations aren't finished yet, but because we have, I think it's sort of been the practice of lately that, given that the policies have to go through 2 reads, that gives the administration a little time to get the administrative regulations finalized so that when the policies are approved after the second read, the AR can be posted simultaneously with the policy. So I think there's some more fleshing out potentially on the AR to be done, but we have till the end of March, if everything goes according to plan, to finish that up. Is that correct, Dr. Stevenson?
Yes, you're correct.
Okay, super. So then let's move into the other policies that are essentially the same as 222, but they have different numbers because they apply to different constituencies within the district. And I'd like to open that up for questions from the committee.
I'm sorry, I thought we already did all those. I'm totally fine with those as well.
Okay.
I thought we did those all at once.
Okay, well, let's entertain, though, the suggestion or the option that you presented with including a different statement relative to the Nicorette gum.
Correct. A statement could be placed in the policy, and I can send the proposed language to Dr. Stevenson offline if needed, but essentially it would say that in the definition of tobacco, it would state that nothing in that definition is meant to mean that whoever is governed by this policy can't have a gum, a lozenge, or any other type of hard candy or something like that that's, designed to be part of like a smoking cessation effort.
Okay, committee, what do you think? Is that a worthwhile insertion?
Absolutely. And when you're talking about basically anyone except a student.
In this case, it would be employees, because we haven't gotten to the community policies yet.
Okay.
Yet.
Okay, so.
And I would say that change, as long as the committee's comfortable with it, seeing it before next week, I would say that that's not a substantive change. I think it's a clarifying change with respect to the definition of tobacco. So I do still think these policies, if there's no other substantive changes, could move forward to a first reading.
Okay, terrific. Well, then let's do that and make note also that, I don't know if it was mentioned, that some of these policies, 323, 423, and 523, had ARs with them, but Dr. Stevenson is recommending that those will go away because they were basically repetitive of the policy. So the policy in and of itself will be the sum and substance of it. Okay, great. So we have those 4 policies we're moving ahead with the changes for next week, and the 239 will come back for a first viewing of this committee in March. All right, and the last item on the agenda, Dr. Stevenson, 130.
So 130 homework and AR 130 is, the purpose of this is to look at, to notify the committee of the work that we're planning to do as administration. The purpose of us to review, to bring together a review of this homework policy is aligned with the possible changes that may be made because of recommendations by the district's sleep study and technology committees. Therefore, the administration is recommending that we convene a homework subcommittee to review the current homework policy and determine what is the best balance regarding homework in relationship to both well-being, technology use, and high levels of achievement for students and teachers. This committee will comprise of representatives from members of many of the district's various stakeholder groups, and I will be the administrative liaison to lead this committee. The committee will meet 34 times in the next few months to review the current recommendations from the sleep and technology committees and make possible recommendations for policy and AR changes to better support the initiatives and bring those before the policy committee.
Okay, terrific. Any feedback?
Yeah, so we just, I believe, did a big homework study. Was it 3 years ago?
There was a homework committee that was in 2014.
Yeah.
That was done that created this policy, and I have, received all that information from Dr. Barczyk.
Okay.
And so I have that information. So the goal here is not necessarily to change the policy. It's to be aligned with understanding what the Wellness Committee, Technology, and Sleep Study are all looking into. Tonight, on the Curriculum Committee, the interim administrator, Dr. McKnight, talked about that they're planning to do some type of survey for students. So he and I are going to discuss about how that survey that he's planning for students and parents, how we can use that information to then analyze what we have in our language in the policy and see if that is that good? Do we make recommendations? Right. Or so it is. The purpose of the committee is not to necessarily make changes. We may come to the conclusion that everything is fine.
Okay, good.
So that's the whole purpose of
yeah,
the subject.
Good. I knew you were aware of that. I just didn't want to recreate because that was a lot of work. Like, I don't think we need to start.
Yes, and I
doing
have
all
those
okay.
things. And
Awesome.
First person I talked to was the former liaison of that, Dr. Barczyk.
Good. Thank
Julia?
you.
Nothing at this time. I look forward to hearing about the subcommittee's recommendations.
Mrs. McMenamin? Rachel? You're good? Okay. Well, then, thank you very much for briefing us on that, Dr. Stevenson. and we look forward to that work getting underway. And that leads us to new business. Does anybody have any new business this month?
Nope.
No? Okay. And seeing that there's nobody in the public, there's no public comment, so thank you all. Have a great night, everyone.